June 6th, 1944, D-Day. What if the biggest battles of World War II weren't fought with bullets, but with brilliant lies? Imagine entire armies outmaneuvered by fake tanks, phantom radio chatter, and ghost divisions. We're diving deep into the clandestine world of World War II espionage, where cunning deceptions didn't just turn the tide of war, they rewrote history. The Phantom Army, D-Day's greatest trick. The largest amphibious invasion in history, when over 150,000 Allied soldiers crossed the English Channel to storm the beaches of Normandy. We all know the iconic images: men leaping from landing craft under machine gun fire, paratroopers dropping from the sky, the desperate struggle to secure a foothold on continental Europe. But behind the smoke, sand, and sacrifice lies another story. A story not of soldiers charging into battle, but of artists, stage magicians, intelligence officers, and spies weaving an illusion so convincing it fooled Adolf Hitler himself. This was an army that didn't exist, a force of inflatable tanks, wooden planes, fake landing craft, and phantom radio traffic. A ghostly legion stationed in fields and airstrips across England, visible from the air, alive on the airwaves, but nothing more than props and imagination. This elaborate deception was called Operation Fortitude, and it may have been the most successful trick in the history of warfare, because while brave men bled on the sands of Normandy, their survival depended on whether Hitler believed the lie. And he did. Tonight we dive into the story of the Phantom Army, the operation that turned rubber tanks and fake generals into the sharpest weapon of the Allied invasion. Operation Fortitude, the grand illusion. By early 1944, the war had reached a critical point. The Allies had defeated the Germans in North Africa, pushed them back in Italy, and now looked across the Channel toward Nazi-occupied France. Everyone knew an invasion was coming. The question was where. To Hitler, the most logical target was Pas-de-Calais, the narrowest point of the English Channel, just 20 miles across from Dover. It was the shortest route, the easiest supply line, and the closest jumping-off point for a drive into Germany. Normandy, by contrast, seemed less obvious, a longer route, more exposed, and with fewer ports. The Allies knew Hitler expected Calais, and so they decided to make him double down on that belief. Thus was born Operation Fortitude, a deception so vast it blurred the line between military campaign and theatre production. On maps and official documents, entire phantom divisions were created, complete with insignia, orders of battle, and chain of command. They even had a commander, the famous General George S. Patton, the Allies' most aggressive and feared leader. Surely, Hitler reasoned, Patton would lead the main invasion force. But the magic wasn't only on paper. Fortitude was designed as a multi-sensory illusion. There would be radio traffic, constant streams of fake chatter, simulating supply orders, troop movements, and coordination between non-existent units. There would be visual evidence. Fake tanks and aircraft placed where German reconnaissance planes could photograph them. There would be human confirmation, double agents feeding carefully crafted lies back to their German handlers. Piece by piece, the illusion grew. To the Germans, it was undeniable. The first US Army group, supposedly under Patton's command, was massing in southern England, preparing to cross at Calais. Normandy, that was just a feint, a diversion, or so they thought. Inflatable tanks, dummy airfields, and double agents. Now, let's step into the world of illusion. Imagine flying high over the English countryside in a Luftwaffe reconnaissance plane. Below you, fields stretch out in perfect military order. Lines of Sherman tanks, trucks, and artillery are parked neatly, camouflaged but visible enough to prove their presence. On the coast, landing craft bob in the water, ready to embark. And near airfields, entire squadrons of fighters and bombers sit poised for action, and it looks convincing, but it's all fake. Those tanks? Inflatable rubber designed to be pumped up like balloons. The aircraft? Plywood cutouts, painted to cast just the right shadows. The landing craft? Canvas stretched over scaffolding floating like toys. This was deception at its most creative. Engineers, artists, and even Hollywood set designers contributed to constructing this phantom force. By day, they looked real from the sky. By night, fake campfires flickered, headlights traced movements along roads, and dummy runways lit up to suggest bustling air traffic. But the deception wasn't just physical, it was psychological. Enter the double agents. The most famous was Juan Pujol Garcia, codenamed Garbo. A Spaniard who despised fascism, Garbo managed to convince the Germans he was their most loyal spy in Britain. In reality, he was controlled by British intelligence, and through Garbo and others, the Allies spoon-fed Germany a narrative. The invasion force at Dover, under Patton, was preparing for Calais. Normandy, they reported, would see a small diversionary landing. Nothing more. The brilliance of Garbo's deception was in its believability. He often mixed truth with lies, even reporting small Allied details that could be independently confirmed by the Germans. This built his credibility to the point where German high command trusted him completely. When D-Day came, Garbo told them what they wanted to hear. Normandy was just the opening act. The real invasion was still to come at Calais, and Hitler bought it. Psychological warfare, delaying the German response, and the real genius of the Phantom Army wasn't in rubber tanks or fake planes. It was in the hesitation it created in Hitler's mind. On June 6, 1944, as Allied forces stormed Normandy's beaches under withering fire, German generals scrambled to respond. But when requests were made to release panzer divisions, the armored spearhead of Germany's defense, Hitler said no. Why? Because he believed the Normandy landings were a diversion. The real invasion, he insisted, was still coming at Calais. To commit his best units too early would mean falling into the Allies' trap. And so, for hours, and then days, crack panzer divisions sat idle, waiting for an attack that never came. By the time Hitler realized the truth, it was too late. The Allies had established a beachhead, brought in reinforcements, and begun the push inland. This delay was decisive. Military historians agree that had the Germans thrown their full armored might into Normandy on June 6th, they could have repelled the invasion or at least inflicted catastrophic losses. Instead, their paralysis handed the Allies the breathing room they desperately needed. The Phantom Army had done its job, not by fighting, but by not existing. Even weeks after D-Day, Hitler still clung to the belief that Calais was the true target. The ghost of Patton's army continued to tie down German resources long after the real battle had moved far beyond Normandy. This was more than deception, it was psychological warfare of the highest order, the legacy of the Phantom Army. So what do we make of the Phantom Army today? On one level, it's almost comical, an army of balloons and plywood fooling one of the most feared regimes in history. On another, it's deadly serious. The fate of the entire Allied invasion may have depended on those illusions. Operation Fortitude reminds us that war isn't just about who has the most guns or tanks, it's about who can control the mind of the enemy. In 1944, the Allies didn't just fight on the beaches, they fought in the imagination of their opponent, and they won. The story also challenges how we think about heroes. Yes, the soldiers who stormed Normandy were the undeniable backbone of victory. But somewhere in England, artists painting fake aircraft, engineers pumping up rubber tanks, and spies whispering lies into German ears were just as vital. Their battlefield was deception, and their victory was invisible. In the end, the Phantom Army was one of the greatest tricks in military history. An illusion that saved lives, won battles, and perhaps shortened the war. So the next time you see a photo of D-Day with soldiers braving bullets and waves, remember, behind them stood an army of shadows, an army that never existed, but one that may have turned the tide of history. This has been History on Fleek. If you enjoyed this dive into the Phantom Army, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more hidden stories of the past. And tell us in the comments, what do you think was the greatest deception in history? The Ghost Fleet, the Mediterranean's masterpiece. The deception at Normandy wasn't the Allies' first masterpiece of trickery. In fact, months before D-Day, they had already pulled off another extraordinary illusion in the Mediterranean, one so bold and improbable it reads more like a spy novel than military history. This was Operation Mincemeat, a plan that used a single dead body to fool the entire German High Command, shift Axis defenses, and pave the way for one of the most important Allied victories of the war. It all began in early 1943. After securing North Africa, the Allies were preparing their next move, an invasion of Europe through its so-called soft underbelly. But where exactly would they strike? The natural choice was Sicily, the stepping stone from Africa into Italy. The problem was that it was also the most obvious choice, and the Germans knew it. To storm Sicily head-on without misdirection would risk catastrophic losses. The solution was deception. If the Germans could be convinced that the Allies were aiming somewhere else, then Sicily's defenses might be weakened just enough to give the invasion a fighting chance. And so British intelligence officers dreamed up a scheme so bizarre it bordered on the absurd. They would plant fake invasion plans on a corpse, drop it into enemy waters, and let the Germans discover it. Operation Mincemeat, a dead man's secret. The operation required more than just a body. It required a fully realized identity. A man who never existed, but whose life had to feel real enough to withstand the scrutiny of German intelligence. The chosen alias was Major William Martin of the Royal Marines. First, they needed a suitable body. A man who had died in London under tragic but discreet circumstances was selected, his death hidden from public record. To the outside world, he became Major Martin. To sell the illusion, British intelligence crafted a web of personal and professional details so convincing that the Germans would have no reason to doubt him. In his pockets were love letters from a fictitious fiancée named Pam, a photograph of her smiling sweetly, ticket stubs, keys, and even an overdraft notice from his bank. The everyday clutter of a real man's life. His military papers identified him as an officer with access to sensitive planning documents. And those documents carried the heart of the deception. Carefully drafted memos suggesting that the Allies planned to invade Greece and Sardinia, not Sicily. On the night of April 30th, 1943, the body of Major William Martin was released from a submarine off the coast of Spain, where it eventually washed ashore. The Spanish authorities, sympathetic to Germany, passed the documents to the Abwehr, the German intelligence service. The bait was taken. The backstory and the belief. What made Operation Mincemeat brilliant was its attention to detail. Anyone can forge a memo, but it takes genius to make the life of a man feel authentic. The forged documents weren't just carelessly stuffed into a briefcase. They were built upon layers of character. The love letters and photograph made Martin seem human. The bank notice made him relatable. The small touches, his ID card, his ticket stubs, made him real. When German intelligence examined the material, they found no flaws. They believed they had intercepted genuine Allied invasion plans. Even Hitler himself was convinced. Orders went out to shift German defenses toward Greece and Sardinia. Troops were repositioned, reinforcements diverted, and Sicily's defenses thinned. The brilliance of Mincemeat was that it didn't just trick the Germans with documents, it tricked them into believing they had stumbled upon a golden stroke of espionage. And nothing feels more convincing than information you think you weren't meant to have. The results: Sicily secured. On July 9, 1943, the Allies launched Operation Husky, the invasion of Sicily. Thanks to the success of Operation Mincemeat, German and Italian forces were unprepared. Instead of facing overwhelming resistance, the Allies encountered weakened defenses. Within weeks, Sicily was in Allied hands. The victory opened the road to the invasion of mainland Italy, toppling Mussolini's regime and changing the balance of the war in Europe. Historians estimate that Operation Mincemeat saved thousands, perhaps tens of thousands, of Allied lives. A single corpse, armed with forged documents and an invented past, had shifted the course of the Mediterranean campaign. It remains one of the most astonishing feats of wartime deception ever executed. The Phantom Army in Normandy and the Ghost Fleet in the Mediterranean were different in scale but alike in genius. Both proved that wars can be shaped as much by illusions as by firepower. But the Allies weren't done yet. From the beaches of Normandy to the skies over Europe, deception became an art form, and the next chapter of our story reveals how shadows and whispers continued to outwit the Reich. Ultra and Enigma, the silent weapon. The success of D-Day, the invasion of Sicily, and countless other Allied victories weren't won by bullets alone. Behind the battlefield was a world of shadowy operations and invisible victories, where silence, secrecy, and intellect shaped the outcome of war. Perhaps no tool was more critical or more quietly powerful than the breaking of the Enigma code, the heart of Nazi Germany's military communications. This breakthrough gave birth to one of the Allies' most valuable assets, Ultra, the code name for intelligence derived from deciphered German messages. But it wasn't just the act of breaking the code that won the war, it was what the Allies did with that intelligence, and even more remarkably, what they didn't do, that made Ultra one of the greatest weapons of the Second World War. The Bletchley Park codebreakers. Nestled in the English countryside, far from the front lines, stood a mansion called Bletchley Park. It was here in utmost secrecy that some of the finest minds of Britain, mathematicians, linguists, crossword champions, chess prodigies, worked around the clock to solve the unthinkable, the German Enigma cipher. Enigma was a seemingly unbreakable encryption machine used by the German military. Each message sent through Enigma could be configured in more than 150 quintillion possible ways. With settings changing daily, the Germans believed their messages were absolutely secure. But at Bletchley Park, that belief was about to be shattered. The breakthrough came not in a flash of genius, but through years of relentless work. Polish cryptographers had made early inroads before the war and passed their knowledge to the British. Building on that, codebreakers like Alan Turing, Dilly Knox, and Gordon Welchman began building mechanical devices called bombs, machines that could cycle through Enigma's endless combinations. By 1941, they had cracked the code. Suddenly, Allied commanders could read German naval messages, Luftwaffe plans, and even direct orders from Hitler himself, often within hours of their transmission. This flow of information was codenamed Ultra, and it would become one of the most closely guarded secrets of the entire war, using Ultra to shape the war. But intelligence, no matter how valuable, is only as good as the decisions it enables. With Ultra, the Allies didn't just gain insight, they gained advantage. They could reroute convoys to avoid U-boat wolf packs, pre-position forces ahead of German offensives, and coordinate bombing raids with unparalleled precision. More importantly, Ultra became a tool for strategic deception. Allied planners used decrypted messages to anticipate German expectations, then craft operations that played into them. Operation Fortitude, for example, the Phantom invasion at Calais, was carefully fed and reinforced by insights from Ultra. Planners knew which German commanders had been fooled when they believed it, and how they reacted, all because of intercepted Enigma traffic. Ultra helped win the Battle of the Atlantic, saving untold thousands of lives by outmaneuvering German submarines. It helped blunt German advances in North Africa. It allowed Allied air forces to destroy German fuel supplies before tanks could roll. It gave the Allies a window into the Nazi war machine, one that very few Germans ever suspected was open. But perhaps the greatest trick wasn't breaking Enigma, it was letting the Germans keep using it, deceiving the Germans, letting the code stay secure. Once the Allies began reading Enigma messages, the temptation was enormous to act on every piece of intelligence immediately. But doing so would have exposed the truth, that Enigma was no longer secure. And so the Allies walked a tightrope of deception, acting just enough on ultra-intelligence to make a difference, but not so much that it aroused suspicion. This meant allowing attacks to happen when they could have been prevented, letting convoys be damaged to protect the larger secret, sacrificing small victories to win the war. In some cases, they staged plausible cover stories to explain how they discovered German plans. Recon flights would be sent to areas they already knew were vulnerable, so it looked like intelligence came from the air, not from the code. Agents were fed accidental clues, so their reports seemed to be the source of information, rather than ultra. The Germans, for their part, remained confident. They trusted Enigma absolutely. Even as defeat piled upon defeat, they never suspected that their most private conversations were being read at the highest levels of Allied command. It was one of the greatest double bluffs in military history. The Germans handed over their secrets willingly every day, and the Allies, in return, handed them back their delusions. The war of deception wasn't fought with just rubber tanks or forged letters. It was fought with whispers in the dark, messages intercepted and rerouted, lies hidden within truth. But the final twist in this tale comes not from the battlefield or the cipher room, but from the world of ghosts, rumors, and a body double who may have saved a president's life. The art of misdirection, North Africa to the Pacific. Deception was not a footnote in the Allied strategy. It was a central pillar. From the beaches of Normandy to the codes of Bletchley Park, Allied planners embraced the ancient military principle of misdirection. If you can't defeat your enemy head-on, distract them, confuse them, blind them to your real intentions. But perhaps what's most remarkable is how this strategy was applied globally, across different terrains, cultures, and enemies, and still proved devastatingly effective. From the scorching deserts of North Africa to the vast oceanic chessboard of the Pacific, Allied commanders mastered the art of illusion. Misdirection in the desert, Rommel's mirage at El Alamein. The deserts of North Africa may seem like a strange place for deception. After all, what can you hide in a flat, open, sun-bleached wasteland? But the British Eighth Army under General Bernard Montgomery turned the environment into an ally, especially during the lead-up to the Second Battle of El Alamein in October 1942. The goal? Mislead German Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, the legendary Desert Fox, about where the British offensive would strike. The method, a blend of classic sleight of hand and engineering ingenuity. British engineers constructed dummy tanks, fuel dumps, and even entire water pipelines in the southern sector of the front, where the real attack would not happen. Meanwhile, in the north, where the actual assault was planned, activity was minimized to create the illusion of inactivity. Tanks were disguised as supply trucks, camouflage nets hid massing troops, and to complete the deception, fake radio traffic suggested a build-up elsewhere. To Rommel, it looked like the main attack would hit the south. He repositioned his forces accordingly, but when Montgomery unleashed his true offensive in the north, the German-Italian defense line was overwhelmed. The success of El Alamein wasn't just due to firepower, it was misdirection, military theater executed in the dust and heat of the Sahara. The battle marked a turning point in the North African campaign and the beginning of the end for Axis forces in the region. False fronts in the Pacific, island-hopping illusions, While deception in Europe and North Africa leaned heavily on land-based trickery, the war in the Pacific theater demanded a different kind of illusion. Here, the vastness of the ocean offered both opportunity and danger. Every landing had to be precise, every diversion carefully crafted, because a misstep meant lives lost at sea, or Marines walking into a massacre. One of the most effective uses of deception came during the American campaign of island hopping, bypassing heavily fortified Japanese positions to strike at weaker, strategically vital targets. To succeed, the US Navy and Marines needed to convince the Japanese that their real targets were elsewhere. Take, for example, the invasion of the Marianas in 1944. To mislead Japanese forces, the US conducted Operation Forager, which included false radio traffic, feint landings, and decoy fleet movements. Japanese forces, anticipating attacks on the Caroline or Palaus Islands, diverted their focus. By the time they realized the true target was Saipan, it was too late. Another example, in the lead-up to the Philippines campaign, American commanders leaked misleading operational plans, used electronic jamming, and deployed dummy landing craft in different locations. These actions sowed confusion among Japanese high command, spreading their defenses too thin to stop the real offensive. In some operations, entire task forces were designated to serve purely as distractions, sailing thousands of miles to draw enemy fleets away from true invasion zones. The result? The Allies achieved tactical surprise again and again, seizing airfields, cutting supply lines, and bringing the Japanese Empire closer to collapse. All thanks to shadows and decoys. A global strategy of illusion. What connects all these stories, from Normandy and Sicily to Bletchley Park, El Alamein, and the Pacific, is a strategic doctrine built not just on brute force but on control of perception. The Allies didn't just win battles, they shaped the enemy's reality. They crafted entire fake armies and paraded them in the English countryside. They sent a dead man with forged documents into enemy waters. They whispered lies through trusted spies and painted their warships with misleading signals. They manipulated radio waves, weather forecasts, and even troop behavior, all to sell a fiction that the enemy believed with devastating consequences. This was not improvisation. It was orchestrated misdirection, embedded deep into Allied planning at every level. In fact, by 1943, deception had its own dedicated unit within British Command, the London Controlling Section, led by Colonel John Bevan, whose sole responsibility was to coordinate and manage strategic deceit across every theatre. The legacy of lies, how deception shaped the world. Throughout this series, we've followed an invisible army, not of soldiers, but of illusions. Inflatable tanks, forged letters, phantom fleets, and decoded secrets silently changed the fate of nations. And now, as we stand in the aftermath of World War II's most elaborate deceptions, the question lingers: what did it all mean? And what remains of it today? Because long after the warships were scrapped and the battlefields grown silent, the echoes of those wartime lies continue to shape our world. Not just in museums or military academies, but in the way nations think, act, and defend. Intelligence reimagined. Espionage after World War II. Before World War II, espionage was seen as a murky, almost gentlemanly pursuit. The domain of mysterious diplomats and shadowy agents slipping notes across borders. But after the success of operations like Fortitude, Mincemeat, and Ultra, that perception was utterly transformed. Deception had proven itself not just effective, but decisive. Never before had intelligence and counterintelligence played such a pivotal role in global conflict. The war taught world powers that information, if weaponized properly, could be as devastating as artillery. A forged letter, when timed correctly, could delay tanks. A single leaked lie could save thousands of lives. Post-war, this thinking birthed the intelligence age. The United States created the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, in 1947. The UK's MI6 was fortified and expanded. The Soviet Union escalated its own spy programs, laying the groundwork for the Cold War's decades-long psychological warfare. The blueprint for all of this? The deception playbook of World War II. Military academies began teaching not just tactics and logistics, but psychological operations, propaganda design, and disinformation techniques. Deception became doctrine, a formalized discipline within strategic warfare. What had once been viewed as trickery was now respected as a science. Modern warfare, fighting with shadows. Fast forward to today, and deception no longer lingers in the margins. It is the battlefield. Modern militaries rely on information dominance as much as, sometimes more than, physical superiority. Cyber warfare, false flag operations, and digital propaganda campaigns have become the new tools of control, but their roots trace directly to World War II. Consider how today's special forces use electronic warfare to jam enemy radar, just as the Allies jammed German signals in the desert, or how modern intelligence services use deepfake videos and AI-generated disinformation. Not unlike how British operatives once used typewriters and love letters to sell a fake identity. Even military exercises today often involve red teams playing the enemy, simulating false movements, deploying misinformation to test responses. These techniques mirror the Allied efforts to mislead Hitler about the timing and location of their invasions. And in conflicts worldwide, from Syria to Ukraine to the South China Sea, perception management remains a vital weapon. What your enemy thinks you're doing can be more important than what you actually do. Deception has evolved. But it was World War II that wrote its instruction manual. The human fascination with the hidden war. Beyond its tactical utility, deception has always fascinated us on a deeper level. There's something inherently compelling about the idea that a war, with all its tanks, bombs, and blood, could be steered by a whisper, a forged document, a decoy. We love these stories because they reveal something profound, that the human mind is not just a battlefield, it's a weapon. Think of how often these tales are retold. Books like The Man Who Never Was, films like The Imitation Game, and series like Operation Mincemeat capture imaginations because they show that intellect, creativity, and even humor have a place in warfare. These are stories where soldiers carry briefcases instead of rifles, where lies save lives, where silence speaks louder than gunfire. Even decades later, the legacy of World War II deception continues to inspire not only military minds but storytellers, psychologists, historians, and ethicists. It challenges how we define courage, strategy, and truth itself, and perhaps that's the most enduring legacy. Not just that deception changed the outcome of a war, but that it changed our understanding of what it means to fight one. From the beaches of Normandy to the deserts of Egypt, from the Marianas to the encrypted corridors of Bletchley Park, World War II was a war of shadows as much as steel. It was a war won not only by those who stormed fortresses, but by those who built castles of illusion. In the years since, the legacy of those deceptions has only grown. They reshaped the nature of warfare, redrew the boundaries of strategy, and reminded us that victory often lies not in brute force, but in understanding the enemy's mind. And so as we close this journey through the greatest tricks ever played, remember this: sometimes the most powerful weapon in the world isn't a bomb, a gun, or a tank. It's a well-timed lie, spoken in just the right ear at just the right moment. And history is full of them. This is the ancient diary. Thank you for watching this deep dive into the secret war that shaped our world. Like, share, and subscribe if you believe that the pen and the lie can truly be mightier than the sword. Thanks to this consistency, deception became not just a tactic, it became an art. What other forgotten stories would you like us to uncover next?